Good morning. This is Bobby Albano with California Curb Appeal, and today we're going to be talking about the Residential Lease Agreement. We're going to be going through the form and talking about the different areas of the form, any changes that have been made recently, and how you would present this to your client. How you would complete it correctly. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Okay, we're going to go to the form itself. There we go. And here we are. All right. So the residential or lease or month-to-month rental agreement. So when you are taking a lease listing or you're representing someone who wants to rent actually no, the second one, when you're representing somebody who wants to rent instead of buy, we're going to run into that. You will have clients throughout your career that maybe aren't quite ready to buy, maybe they're close, but you want to be able to help them out now. And it's a very, very good idea to represent them through their rental and then stay close to them, stay in contact with them so that when they are ready, you're going to be the one that they want to work with. And I have worked with many, many buyers that were previous renters, and if you create that relationship with them, there's no other reason for them to think of using anyone else. Especially if you're staying in contact with them, you know when their lease is up. You call them every month or so to check in, just to make sure that they're still on track. So this is a really good way to build your book of business. If you're not working with anyone, it is good to work with renters because it does provide you an income while at the same time you're building your book. So it's a very good idea to work with renters. A lot of times agents don't want to because there's not a lot of money in it. But if you consider the experience that you're getting and the connection that you're getting, it can be worth it. All right. So you're working with a renter and you're looking at different properties. You're taking them through, to look at different properties. Now, yes, with a rental property, if it's been listed in the MLS will tell you what that listing agent is going to offer the agent that brings the tenant. And a lot of times it's very low. I've seen it as low as $50. That's when you have to consider, is the experience and the connection I'm making going to be worth it? And that's a question that only you can answer. For me, it was totally worth it because I didn't have, when you're new, you have nothing else going on. And this is a way to get your foot in the door. It's a way to, just practice learning how to connect, learning how to create a relationship from scratch. And it did very well for me. So you found a list of homes that you're going to show your client to. You look at all the different homes. Your client chooses one, maybe chooses two or three. With a rental property, they're not going to be as picky as they are with something they're going to buy. They may find, five or six that they would be fine with. So when your client has identified some properties that they want to start making applications for, then you are going to assist them in that application process. You're going to call the listing agent and find out. Sometimes it's listed on the listing itself and it'll say, submit the application, what type of application, how do they want to do the credit report. A lot of times they'll allow you to provide that credit report. Sometimes they'll want the client to use their credit reporting agency and pay the 30 or 40 bucks. It just depends on the listing agent. So sometimes you can put together an application package, which includes the car application, a copy of their credit report, and their pay stubs and bank statements. A package like that will generally be good for any type of application, but always check with the listing agent to make sure that they're going to be okay with that. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and collect those items from your client and put together that application package. Now the application can be found right here. So if you type in application, then application to lease or rent and screening fee disclosure. So you can just use that form right there, and you can send this to your client electronically. They can fill it out 100% online and sign it online too and get it back to you. So it's very, very, very easy to get that together. All right, so you've applied for several different properties, and you finally hear back from one of the listing agents saying, "Congratulations, we've chosen your client to rent to." Okay, so the next step in that is going to be to decide. Actually, it will be the listing agent who provides the lease agreement. So if you're the listing agent on this transaction, you're going to, I should have explained it from that side. That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to explain it from both sides. So if you're the listing agent on that property, what has happened probably is somebody has asked you to find a tenant for their property. And it's the same process as finding a buyer for their property. The listing agreement is going to look very much like the listing agreement for purchase. And you're going to do the same things. You're going to have them sign it. You're going to have them sign some disclosures about mold, about bed bugs, various different disclosures. And then you're going to market it. You're going to put the property into the MLS the same way you would with a sale, and you're going to schedule an open house, and you're going to market the property the same way you would any other property. During your open house or during your marketing, you're going to get a lot of inquiries. And with those inquiries, you're going to either represent the buyer, or you're going to get calls from agents who are representing the buyer. I find a lot of times with a lease listing, you end up doing both sides. It's more lucrative that way for you, and it's a lot simpler because there's very few pieces to this. So let's say you get a call from somebody who found you on Zillow. You've done the representing the tenant side of it, and now you're ready to write the lease agreement itself. So you've gone through their backup documentation, their application with your client, who is the landlord in this case, and between the two of you have decided that this is the tenant that you want to move forward with. So if there are two agents, the agent with the listing agreement would actually do the lease agreement, but since you're representing both sides, it's going to be you. So you're going to sit down with your client. You're going to sit down with your client, your landlord client first, and you're going to go through the items on this lease agreement to make sure that you're both in agreement as far as, is the landlord going to pay for water? Is the landlord going to pay for trash? What about landscaping? Is the tenant going to be responsible for landscaping, or is the landlord? So you could go through this lease agreement just real lightly and check on those different items, and make sure that you understand what your client wants as far as the amount of rent, who's paying for what, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure that you know the amount of the security deposit and what is going to happen with that. Once we talk about the lease listing agreement, then we can talk about how you get paid from that security deposit. Okay, so once you know the wishes of the landlord, now you can actually sit down with your client, the tenant and start completing this lease agreement. I like to do it with the tenant. A lot of times you'll do it before you see the tenant, but either way, you're going to go through and complete this. So the date up here is today's date. It's the date that you fill it out. It doesn't really, it doesn't have to be the date that the person moves in or the date that you accepted the application or anything like this. It's going to be a date that you're actually filling this out. And it's going to be used as an identifier of this particular lease agreement as opposed to another lease agreement. So it's like an identifier. All right, and then you're going to put your tenant's name right here. Anyone over the age of 18 will need to be on the lease. That is typically how it's done in the state of California. So if you are renting to 3 adults, let's say they're going to be roommates, you'll want to grab an application for all 3 adults. If it is 2 adults and some children, you'll want to grab a lease application package from both adults. That way, anyone who can be responsible for payment of the lease and the fulfillment of the lease contract will be held responsible for that. Okay, and then you're going to put down here, it says rental property owner or authorized broker or agent or property manager. So the housing provider. So in a tenant lease situation, you could have many different players. It could have been maybe the property manager who hired you. It could have been the owner of the property who hired you. It could be another real estate agent who hired you. Whoever is going to be the responsible person to collect rent, to make repairs, those types of items, that is going to be who is on this lease agreement. It's most likely the person who hired you. For example, in our property management company, our property manager will be the one who hires the agent to market and get a tenant for that property. Sometimes, that it's done by the property owner if they're self-managed homes, and sometimes it's going to be a property management company. So whoever that is, that's who's going to go on this line. Okay. Housing provider rents to tenant and tenant rents from housing provider the real property and improvements described as, and you'll put the address right here. And we all understand what is meant by real property and improvements, right? Real property is the ground and the improvements is anything built above the ground. And then B, the premises are for the sole use and personal residence by the following named persons only. Okay, so let's say it's 2 adults and some kids. You can write on this line here every inhabitant in that house. If there's children, you can put and 2 children. You don't have to name them, but you're going to want to put all adults in the home and then how many children there are. Any person in the premises other than those listed in the paragraphs are considered guests. Guests are not permitted to stay more than 14, or you can add however many days without housing providers' written consent. So this is an opportunity for you to be able to explain to your new tenants that if there are guests staying, they can only stay up to 14 days or whatever the landlord prefers. And let them know that if they do have somebody move in, that person will have to be added to the lease, or they will have to leave because there are no subletting allowed. And I believe there's a place on this contract where we identify that there is no subletting allowed. Okay, the following personal property maintained pursuant to paragraph 11 is included. On this line, you're going to want to put any appliances that belong to the property owner, such as sometimes a refrigerator is included, sometimes a microwave is included, a Ring doorbell. In one of our rentals, the owner actually offers a internet service, so there's a modem in there and a router and stuff. So anything that's personal property that is not a fixture will go on this line. And then it says, or if checked, the personal property on the attached addendum is included. So if there's a lot, then you might want to put it in an addendum. And then D, the premises may be subject to local rent control or control ordinance. If the property is subject to local rent control, you'll want to put that on this line here. Now, in our area, I don't know of any areas that are, or any properties that are. None of our properties are. But if the premises is, then you will be made aware of it by the owner of the property. Okay, then you're going to want to put the term. When does this lease agreement begin? This is also called the commencement date. You're going to want to put it there. And it says, if tenant has not paid all amounts then due, tenant has no right to possession or keys to the premises, and this agreement is voidable at the option of housing provider. 2 calendar days after giving tenant a notice to pay, notice may be delivered to tenant in person by mail to tenant's last known address or by mail. If provided in tenant's application or previously used by tenant to communicate with housing provider or its agents, if housing provider elects to void the lease, housing provider shall refund to the tenant all rent and security deposit paid. So what this is saying is that if there was some money due, let's say they didn't have quite all of the security deposit and they promised to pay it at move-in, and when they see you at move-in, they don't have it, then you would give the tenant a notice to pay, which is in your car forms. This gives them an extra 2 days to come up with it. And it really just, it's kind of like a final notice that says, if you don't pay in 2 days, then we're going to void this agreement and you'll get your money back. So that is if there's any money left owed at the commencement date. All right, so here you're going to decide, is this a month-to-month agreement or a lease agreement? Now, typically, if you are leasing or hired to lease property, they're going to want a regular lease. But you will find that out from your client, whoever hired you, whether they want a month-to-month or whether they want a lease. If they want a lease, then you ask them what terms are acceptable. Is a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. Sometimes and a client may want a 3-year lease. That happens more with commercial property, but I've seen it in residential property too. So you're going to check the box, whichever one that is decided. Let's say in this case, we're doing a lease. So you're going to put the termination date. You're going to calculate that by, it's going to be the day before the commencement date a year from now. So if the commencement date is, let's say the 1st of September, then your termination date would be a year later. So 2024 on the last day of August. Okay, the day before. And then it's always going to terminate at 11:59 p.m. Okay, so that's like a minute before midnight, where it would turn over to the next day. So it's the last possible minute before 9/1. Okay. All right. So tenant shall vacate the premises upon termination of the agreement unless housing provider and tenant have extended this agreement in writing or signed a new agreement. or mandated by any rent increase cap or just cause eviction control under any state or local law. Housing provider accepts rent from the tenant other than past due rent, in which case a month-to-month tenancy shall be created, which either party may terminate as specified in paragraph 2A. Rent shall be at a rate agreed to by the housing provider and tenant or allowed by law. All other terms and conditions of this agreement shall remain in full force and effect. So what this is saying is that unless the housing provider, whoever that is, whoever's managing this this agreement, let's say it's the owner in this case, if the owner of the property says to the tenant before this agreement terminates, hey, I'd like to extend your lease for another year. We're going to do a lease extension. We'll sign it on this date, and that's what's going to happen. Or on, let's say on 9/1/2024, tenant pays rent and that rent is accepted by the owner of the property, that will convert this agreement into a month-to-month agreement just by that simple act of accepting the rent on 9/1. Or if for some reason this person is evicted. So unless those three cases happen, this agreement terminates on 8/31/2024 at 11:59 p.m. So you would want to advise the property owner or the, in this case, the property owner that, of these things that he needs to do to extend the agreement or to end the agreement. As a courtesy, if the agreement's going to end, I would recommend to any owner that they, just confirm with the tenant, hey, your agreement ends on 8/31/2024. I expect you to be out of the house and we're going to inspect on 9/1 or something like that, just to confirm that the lease will be ending. Okay, number 3. Rent shall mean all monetary obligations of tenant to housing provider under the terms of the agreement except security deposit. So here's where you're going to put in the amount of the rent. So let's say it's $2,000 a month. Rent is payable in advance on the first or whatever date of each calendar month and is delinquent on the next day. So typically, I like to start all my leases on the first, but we manage a lot of leases. So for us, it makes sense. If it's one person who owns one house and who's renting it, he may want the lease to start on the day of commencement. Maybe it's the 16th, so it would be due on the 16th day of each calendar month. That's totally up to whoever's managing the agreement. If commencement date falls on any day other than the day rent is payable under paragraph 3B, and tenant has paid one full month's rent in advance of commencement date, rent for the second calendar month shall be prorated and tenant shall pay 1/30 of the monthly rent per day for each day remaining in the prorated second month. So this is saying, let's say he's saying the rent is due on the 1st and commencement was the 16th. So what this is saying is that rent will be prorated. And the typical way of prorating rent is by taking 1/30 of the rent amount per day instead of I think there's 31 days in August. You wouldn't divide it by 31. You would just simply divide it by 30. And the second calendar month will be prorated and the tenant will pay just 1/30 of the monthly rent per day, each day remaining in the prorated second month. So they pay full month to move in, but then on that second month, they prorate it so that when they're paying rent on the 1st, it's the proper amount of rent on that 3rd month. Okay. Now payment, how are they to make the payment? It says rent shall be paid by personal check, money order, cashier's check, or made payable to whomever. So this is where you're going to put, who they make the check to, how it can be made. Um, if there's another way to make it, you can check this box, wire electronic payment to. If it's Oh, they did add it. Okay. Or other payment via electronic apps such as PayPal or Venmo will or will not be accepted. So, depending on your landlord's wishes, the owner of the property's wishes, you're going to complete this section based on that. You won't ask your tenant, you're going to ask the landlord. And then number two, rent shall be delivered to. Who is it going to be paid to? What's their phone number? What's their address? Or any other location subsequently specified by housing provider in writing to tenant. If checked, rent may be paid personally between the hours of such and such on following days. So, like in our case, any one of our tenants for the properties we manage can come into the office. So we would definitely put that. But if you're working for a sole owner, then you probably wouldn't use this. Or maybe you do. Maybe he's okay with somebody coming to his house on certain days between certain hours and paying the rent. So this is all, you're going to get the information from the owner of the property. And then number three, if any payment is returned for non-sufficient funds or because tenant stops payment, then after that, housing provider may in writing require tenant to pay rent in cash for 3 months, and all future rent shall be paid by money order or cashier's check. So that's an option that the owner of the property can have. All right, now we're at security deposit. Typically, the amount of the security deposit is going to be the same as the first month's rent, but it may not be. It's going to be whatever the owner of the property wishes to have. Now, if in this case, if we're working for a sole owner who's managing the property himself, it's probably going to be transferred to and held by the owner of the premises. If it is managed by a property management company, then you'll need to find out how they handle security deposits, because some property management companies will hold the security deposit for the owner in a trust account, but you'll have to find out in your particular case how they want to do that. If it's a sole owner, it's just transferred to and held by the owner of the property. All right, all or any portion of the security deposit may be used as reasonably necessary to cure tenants' default in payment of rent, which includes late charges, non-sufficient funds, fees, or other sums due, repair damage, excluding ordinary wear and tear caused by tenant or by a guest, invitee, or licensee of the tenant, clean premises if necessary upon termination of the tenancy, and replace or return personal property or appurtenances. Security deposit shall not be used by tenant in lieu or payment of the last month's rent. If all or any portion of the security deposit is used during the tenancy, tenant agrees to reinstate the total security deposit within 5 days after written notice is delivered to tenant. Within 21 days after tenant vacates the premises, housing provider shall furnish tenant with an itemized statement indicating the amount of any security deposit received and the basis for its disposition and supporting documentation as required by California Civil Code 1950.5, and return any remaining portion of the security deposit to the tenant. So this is very important and something that you're going to want to advise your client, the property owner, of. So California state law requires that tenants cannot say on the let's say they're going to move out on the last month of this agreement. They're going to vacate the premises on the 31st of August. So on August 1st, they call the owner and say, you know what, just use my deposit to pay the last month's rent. I'm going to be leaving. That is not allowed. They need to pay that rent, because what could happen is when the owner of the property takes possession back, if there are damages, there's going to be no money to pay those damages. So that last month's rent has to be paid, and the rules must be followed for the return of the security deposit. So within 10 days of that tenant moving out, the owner has to go in, assess the property, repair anything that needs to be repaired other than ordinary wear and tear. They can't say that, the carpet was, worn, therefore I have to replace the carpet. If it's regular wear and tear, then the owner needs to understand that regular wear and tear is going to happen. But within 10 days, the owner needs to put on in writing, and there's forms for this too, in writing what items that they needed to repair, replace, anything like that. If there was rent still owed, maybe some late charges or something like that, those can be collected at that time. And then any remaining security deposit will need to be returned to the tenant within that 10 days. So that's what I would advise my property owner client of their responsibilities. Okay, so whatever address you put on this first page, it's going to automatically populate on the top of each page. And going on about the security deposit, the security deposit will not be returned until all tenants have vacated the premises and all keys returned. Any security deposit returned by check shall be made out to all tenants named on this agreement or as subsequently modified. So if the deposit was $2,000 and all keys were not returned, so the property owner can then charge for keys to be made. And then when he's returning the deposit, and there are 3 adults or maybe 2 adults on this agreement, the check would be made to both adults, so that both need to cash the check. No interest will be paid on security deposit unless required by local law. Locally here, we don't have any laws to that effect. If the security deposit is held by owner, tenant agrees not to hold broker responsible for its return. If the security deposit is held in owner's broker's trust account and broker's authority is terminated before the expiration of this agreement, and security deposit is released to someone other than the tenant, then the broker shall notify the tenant in writing where and to whom the security deposit has been released. Once tenant has been provided such notice, tenant agrees not to hold broker responsible for the security deposit. So let's say the owner was using a property management company. That property management company went out of business. That property management company is responsible to let the tenant know where his deposit went to. That's required by law. Once that company has let the tenant know, then the tenant can't hold the property management company responsible for that security deposit. Okay, so this is a little chart of what has been received at the time that the agreement was drawn up and how they were paid. So move-in funds shall be paid by, and then a property owner will indicate how it needs to be paid. And then you're gonna put here what you received and what it was for. So if you receive the rent from, it's gonna start on September 1st, so September 1, oh, okay, 09/01/2023 through the end of September 9/30/2023, and that was $2,000. So you're going to put what's due here and the amount received here. So at the end, you're going to have like a little statement for them. So let's say they did pay the first month's rent. It was due at the lease signing and it was payable to Joe, owner of the property. And the security deposit is due is $2,000. Let's say you received half of that on this day, and it's to be made to you. All right, now this is where the reason why it says payable to and it's not automatically the owner is because when you took this listing, you and the owner of the property negotiated a rate. So you have talked about, what your rate is. The owner of the property agreed with that. And normally your pay will come out of the security deposit. So, one of the more common rates that you would be paid is a percentage of the annual rent. So if it's $2,000 per month annually, it's $24,000. And if you negotiated a rate of, I don't know, let's see what a normal one would be. I think like 10% might be normal. So 10% of 24,000 would be 2,400. Yeah, so that would be a typical rate. So what normally might happen is if your rate was 24,000, then maybe the security deposit will be 24,000. That way, when the property tenant pays it, they'll be paying your commission. So to make the paperwork easier, you can say payable to you. So I'm going to put agent here. Okay, so that you're paid right up front. As soon as the tenant can move in, you've been paid. And then if you listed it in the MLS and another agent brought you the tenant, then you would pay out of your commission, their commission, whatever you agreed in the MLS to pay the agent. Okay. So other, what would you put on other? If there's a key deposit, you would put the key deposit here. If there's any other fees or pet deposit, you would put it here. And then at the end here, you're going to, after you fill out this thing completely, you're going to have this balance due. So when you're talking to your tenant, you can say, now this is what you need to bring on the day of commencement when we hand over keys and you can start your move-in. And then, like we said before, if they don't have that, you give them a notice to pay. If they don't pay, then this agreement is voided and you return whatever they did pay. The $3,000 is what you've already received. You would return that amount of money. Okay. All right. The maximum amount of security deposit, however designated, cannot exceed 2 months' rent. That's California state law for an unfurnished premises, or 3 months' rent for a furnished premises, in addition to any rent for the first month paid on or before initial occupancy. This limitation does not prohibit the payment of advance rent of not less than 6 months' rent if the term of the base of the lease is 6 months or longer. So you can't accept more than 6 months in advance. All right, late charges and return checks. Tenant acknowledges either late payment of rent or issuance of a return check may cause housing provider to incur costs and expenses. So you're just going to put in here the amount of or when a payment is considered late. The contract defaults to 5 days. I think 5 days is fine. But if you want to give them a little longer, you can, or the landlord can. So if you took the default, it's 5 calendar days after the date due or if a check is returned. Tenant shall pay to housing provider respectively an additional sum of. Now, in California, there is a limit on the amount of late charge you can charge. I believe it's 5%, and 5% is actually a pretty good amount. That's the amount I usually charge. So you're going to put 5 there, and you can put what that equals right there. So 5% of 2,000 is, I think, $100. So $100 or 5% of the rent. And then the NSF fee is $25 for the first return check and $35 for any subsequent return checks. It says housing provider and tenant agree that these charges represent a fair and reasonable estimate of the costs housing provider may incur by reason of the tenant's late or non-sufficient fund payment. Any late charge or non-sufficient funds fee due shall be paid with the current installment of rent. Housing provider's acceptance of any late charge or non-sufficient funds fee shall not constitute a waiver as to any default of tenant. Housing provider's right to collect a late charge, default of tenant. Housing provider's right to collect a late charge or a non-sufficient funds fee shall neither be deemed an extension of the rent extension of the date rent is due under paragraph 3, nor prevent housing provider from exercising any other rights and remedies under this agreement and as provided by law. So what this is saying is just because you paid your rent late and you paid a late fee, it doesn't extend the date that the rent was originally due. So if the landlord wants to proceed with eviction proceedings, he can, just because you paid a late charge and you paid it your rent late doesn't mean that that due date was changed. So that's something you probably want to mention to the tenant when you're speaking with him. Okay, parking, storage, and utilities. This is where you're going to put if parking, storage, and utilities, or what parking, storage, and utilities are included in their rent. So you can just read through this, and most of the time, parking is permitted in, let's say, the driveway. So we just put driveway. And it's included, is included in the rent, and there will be no additional fees. Same with storage. So this really speaks to additional storage. So if there isn't a place for actual storage to be taking place, you just want to click here. Except for tenants' personal property contained entirely within the premises, storage is not permitted on the premises, because it's really speaking of additional storage. And then utilities. This is where you want to speak to the landlord and ask him which utilities are you willing to pay. Now, when it comes to trash and water, there are some companies that will not allow the property owner to switch that into somebody else's name. So the landlord must pay those himself. In that case, I would recommend just raising the rent by the typical amount of those utilities and just include it in the rent, because it's going to be extra work for that landlord to pass on that utility fee. I mean, that's an option. The landlord can certainly do that, but it's just an extra step that that you don't have to make. All right, and that's actually explained down here. So water submeter. Water use on the premises is measured by a submeter, and tenant will be separately billed for water usage based on the submeter. See attached water submeter addendum. for additional terms. So let's say the landlord owns 3 different houses. He pays one water bill, but he's put sub meters on each unit. So he's going to act as the utility company and charge them for the amount of water that they use. If that's the case for water, gas, or electric, oh no, this is if they do not have a separate gas meter. For water, then you're going to check this box. For gas, let's say he owns 3 units and he gets one gas bill, but there's no separate gas meter, then he'll check that box. Same with electric. If there's no separate electrical meter, he'll check that box. So this is kind of a disclosure to the tenant. How they're going to be paying the utilities is it's something that the landlord is going to estimate. Are they going to put it in their name? Those sort of things. So normally you're just going to put tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and services and the following charges. If you want to add $50 a month for water, let's say, because, there's more than one unit on the meter, then you would put that here. Since it does say that the tenant will pay for all, then you would just put any exceptions right here. So normally how we do it is we have the tenant pay for everything except for water and trash. Those two stay in the owner's names, and we just adjust the rent to cover those costs. Okay, so condition of premises. Tenant has examined premises and all, if any, all furniture, furnishings, appliances, landscaping, and check all that apply. Oh, no, fixtures, including smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. So you're going to check whichever of these applies. So if the tenant has actually inspected the premises, you want to check this box. Tenant's acknowledgement of the condition of these items is contained in an attached statement of condition. And Zip Forms actually has a statement of condition that you can have the tenant complete, or you can complete it based on your own inspection. The tenant can sign it and you can check this box that everything's been inspected. Or housing provider will deliver to tenant a statement of condition within 3 days after the execution of this agreement, or prior to the commencement date, or within 3 days after the commencement date. Tenant shall complete and return the statement to housing provider within 3 days after delivery. Tenant's failure to return the statement within that time shall conclusively be deemed of tenant's acknowledgement of the condition. So this is what I like to use, because I can just simply give them the form. They have 3 days to give it back. If they don't give it back, they are accepting the condition as how we state that it is. And then the tenant, the other option is tenant will provide housing provider a list of items that are damaged or not in operable condition within 3 days, or however many, after commencement date, and not as a contingency of this agreement, but rather as an acknowledgement of the condition. So they can't say, oh, this doesn't work, therefore I'm not going to pay rent until you fix it, or I'm not going to move in until you fix it. It's not a contingency. It's simply an acknowledgement. Oh, this does not work. So that's another option, or you can have your own option right here. If you wanted to choose your own option, it could be something like tenant will take pictures and submit them to the landlord, or whatever you want. But you do want to have a baseline of condition. You do want to have something that the property owner can go back to determine and to prove that there was damages made, so that when he's doing his move out statement and saying this was damaged, he can actually show this is how it was when you moved in, this is how it is when you moved out, therefore it is damaged and you owe. So just to mitigate any kind of problems that you might have You really want to be clear on how you're going to determine condition at commencement and at move out. Okay. All right. We are out of time, but we can actually finish this up next week. And then also, I think we can finish this up and go through the lease listing agreement. So next week we can actually do both. So let's do that. And I will wrap it up there. Does anyone have any questions? We do have about 5 minutes. Okay, so with that, we'll end here and we'll see you next Wednesday. All right, bye-bye.